Have you ever imagined that the world's largest hot desert could transform completely in just a few decades? The immense sea of sand we know as the Sahara is undergoing a dramatic, silent, and accelerated metamorphosis that few of us notice in the hustle of our daily lives. But the experts? They're sounding every possible alarm. What does a desert thousands of miles away have to do with humanity's future? More than you might think. This seemingly desolate vastness, covering a third of the African continent, is one of the most precise thermometers of our planet's health. And what it's showing us now is something that even the most pessimistic scientists didn't predict would happen so quickly. To understand the magnitude of these changes, we need to go back in time. About 10,000 years ago, the Sahara wasn't the desert we know today. Rock art images scattered throughout the region show scenes of green pastures, abundant lakes, and rich fauna that included giraffes, elephants, and even hippos. The so-called Green Sahara period provided the ideal environment for the development of some of the earliest human civilizations. Over millennia, changes in climate patterns transformed this green paradise into the arid desert we know. But now, in just a few decades, we're witnessing changes that would normally take thousands of years to occur. And we're not just talking about scientific curiosities. These transformations directly affect millions of people living on the desert's edges, and indirectly, all of us. From small villages in Mali to financial centers in New York and Tokyo, the Sahara's future is intrinsically linked to ours. The transformations in this immense ecosystem influence global climate patterns, migration flows, regional political stability, and even the availability of essential natural resources for green technologies. The numbers are striking and difficult to ignore. In the last 5 decades, the average temperature in the Sahara has increased by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, almost double the global average. Seems small? For an ecosystem already at its limit, each fraction of a degree represents an unbearable additional pressure. Recent studies using satellite imagery show that the Sahara is expanding at a rate of approximately 10% per decade. This means that every year, an area equivalent to almost 3 times the size of Portugal is swallowed by advancing desertification. Towns and villages that were hundreds of kilometers from the desert border a generation ago now struggle against sand dunes invading their streets. But territorial expansion isn't the only concern. Sandstorm patterns are also changing dramatically. Scientists have documented a 300% increase in the frequency of these storms over the last 20 years. What were once predictable seasonal events are now irregular and intensified occurrences. A single storm in 2023 transported more than 180 million tons of Saharan dust across the Atlantic, enough to cover Paris with a 2-centimeter layer of sand. Water, already scarce in this region, is becoming even more precious. The few underground aquifers are being drained at unsustainable rates. Measurements with penetrating radar technology show that the water level in some historic oases has dropped more than 30 meters in just 15 years, an unprecedented rate in geological records. Few know that the Sahara is one of the largest controllers of global climate. Saharan dust that crosses the Atlantic fertilizes the Amazon rainforest with essential nutrients, especially phosphorus and iron. With changing storm patterns, this delicate balance is being disrupted. Paradoxically, the world's driest desert is partially responsible for the health of the planet's wettest forest. Another surprising fact: the Sahara is the world's largest exporter of sand, but not for construction. Desert sand, polished by winds over millennia, is too fine and rounded to be used in concrete. However, it's perfect for solar panels. Silicon extracted from Saharan sands fuels a global solar energy industry valued in billions of dollars. The recently detected changes in the mineral composition of the sand could have profound implications for the global energy transition. One of the most enigmatic phenomena is the emergence of ghost lakes in the desert's deepest depressions. At increasingly irregular intervals, underground water briefly emerges, creating temporary lakes that can reach dozens of square kilometers before evaporating within weeks. These events, once extremely rare, have occurred 5 times in the last decade. Biologists have discovered that these ephemeral lakes harbor unique life forms, microorganisms capable of remaining dormant for decades until water returns. Perhaps most impressive is the so-called reverse Sahel effect. Traditionally, the Sahel, the transition strip between the Sahara and sub-Saharan savannas, has been seen as a victim of desertification. However, recent satellite images show a contradictory phenomenon. While certain areas of the Sahara advance southward, some northern regions are experiencing limited greening. In small pockets, precipitation has increased by 15%, allowing vegetation to grow where there was only sand before. This complex pattern challenges our traditional understanding of climate change and desertification. Behind the numbers and natural phenomena are deeply moving human stories. Communities that have inhabited the Sahara's edges for countless generations are being forced to abandon their ancestral lands. Traditional knowledge accumulated over millennia about how to survive in this hostile environment is rapidly becoming obsolete in the face of new conditions. Trans-Saharan trade routes, some in continuous use since the 8th century, are being disrupted. Caravans that followed stable geographical landmarks for centuries now get lost in unrecognizable landscapes. In 2022, a traditional salt caravan lost 3 members when unexpected dunes blocked access to a water well known for generations. Agriculture on the desert's margins is in crisis. Irrigation techniques developed over centuries are no longer sufficient. It's estimated that more than 200,000 hectares of previously cultivable land have been abandoned in the last decade. Crop varieties adapted to local conditions are disappearing, taking with them an invaluable genetic heritage. These environmental pressures are exacerbating historical, political, and ethnic tensions. Conflicts over scarce resources, especially water, are intensifying. Cities like Timbuktu, Agadez, and Tamanrasset, once prosperous centers of trade and culture, face existential challenges with advancing sands and retreating economic opportunities. What's causing these dramatic changes? The answer is complex and multifaceted, but undeniably linked to human activities. Global greenhouse gas emissions are fundamentally altering the climate patterns that have governed the Sahara for millennia. A recent study using advanced climate modeling demonstrated that the 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in global temperature could trigger a phase change in the Sahara's climate system. It's like a glass of water that upon reaching 100 degrees Celsius doesn't get hotter but completely changes state, turning into vapor. The Saharan climate system seems to be reaching that critical point. The modification of high-altitude air currents, known as jet streams, is redirecting moisture that previously reached the desert's edges. Simultaneously, ocean warming is altering evaporation and precipitation patterns on continental scales. Deforestation in sub-Saharan regions also plays a crucial role. Forests south of the Sahel functioned as natural barriers against desert expansion. As they're removed for agriculture, mining, or urbanization, the advance of sands meets less resistance. Excessive extraction of underground water, driven by industrial agricultural projects and urban growth, is depleting fossil reservoirs that took tens of thousands of years to form. Once depleted, these aquifers may take millennia to replenish, if they ever do under the new climate conditions. Facing this alarming scenario, what is the future of the Sahara and the people who depend on it? Climate models point to different scenarios, none reassuring if we continue on the current path. In the most extreme scenario, the desertification process could dramatically accelerate, expanding the Sahara by up to 20% of its current area by 2050. Cities like Dakar, Khartoum and Cairo would face unprecedented environmental pressures, potentially triggering mass migrations. It's estimated that up to 100 million people could be displaced, creating a humanitarian crisis of historic proportions. On the other hand, some models suggest the possibility of partial greening in certain regions, especially in the extreme west and east of the desert. Intensified, though irregular, precipitation could create opportunities for ecological restoration and new agricultural approaches. However, even in this more optimistic scenario, conditions would be drastically different from current ones, requiring massive adaptations. An intriguing possibility is the emergence of a new Sahel, a transition strip with unique characteristics, neither desert nor savanna in the traditional sense. This new ecosystem could harbor life forms adapted to extreme oscillating conditions, creating unprecedented ecological niches. In the technological field, the Sahara could become a laboratory for innovations in renewable energy and water conservation. Ambitious projects already exist, such as the Great Green Wall, an initiative to create an 8,000 kilometers tree barrier crossing the entire African continent to stop desert advance. Emerging solar desalination technologies could transform the region's abundant solar energy into drinking water. Biotechnology companies are studying Saharan extremophiles organisms adapted to extreme conditions, seeking insights for resilient agriculture and even medical applications. Genes from plants that survive in the desert could be fundamental for developing crops capable of withstanding the more severe conditions that many agricultural regions will face in the future.